I was never the favorite. That was something I came to understand, even as a child. My parents, who prided themselves on their logical thinking and rational decisions, had always seen Sophie as the perfect one. She was everything they expected from a daughter: smart, outgoing, pragmatic, and driven. She had the world at her feet, and everyone knew it. On the other hand, I was the dreamer. The one who preferred stories over spreadsheets, who stayed up late reading novels while the rest of the family focused on their careers and social standing. Sophie was their golden child. From the moment she could walk, it seemed like every decision they made was aimed at shaping her into someone they could be proud of, someone who could fit neatly into their vision of success. She went to the best schools, was always top of her class, and had a boyfriend who could easily be described as perfect. She was poised to marry James, who was, according to my parents, an ideal match. Handsome, successful, and coming from a well-off family. Sophie's life was a series of well-executed plans, all falling into place one after another. A storybook life, at least on the surface. She made everything look so easy. And then there was me. I wasn't supposed to be this way. I knew that. I didn't fit into the mold they so carefully crafted for us. I couldn't bring myself to care about the things they valued. Career paths that led to six-figure salaries, stable lives in affluent neighborhoods, a future that looked like everyone else's. I preferred the world of words, books, literature, the exploration of human nature. To them, it was impractical. I was told time and again that I wasn't realistic enough. I remember the look on my mother's face when I told her I wanted to study literature in college. It wasn't just a frown, but a deep disappointment she tried to hide behind the words. "Are you sure about this? You could get a scholarship to business school. That's where your future is, Madison." Her voice always carried that tone, a tone that subtly told me that I wasn't enough, not like Sophie. Every conversation felt like a reminder that I had made the wrong choice. Sophie's path was laid out for her, and everyone supported her. Mine, on the other hand, was full of doubts and second-guessing. I had tried to ignore the sting, to push aside the nagging feeling that I was always walking in Sophie's shadow. But sometimes it was impossible. I would watch my parents shower her with praise, how proud they were of her accomplishments, how they never hesitated to tell anyone about her perfect life. Her new car, her engagement ring, her job at the prestigious law firm. Everything Sophie did was celebrated, and I was left to stand on the sidelines, clapping politely but never truly a part of it. Their conversations were filled with plans for Sophie's future, her wedding, her house, her career, and every time they spoke about her, I felt like an outsider. I couldn't share in their excitement, couldn't join in their pride. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't fit into their vision of success. To them, I was a failure, a mistake of sorts. A daughter who had decided to follow her dreams instead of following the well-trodden path to success. I remember one particular incident that stands out in my mind. It was the day Sophie announced her engagement. She came into the living room beaming with happiness, and my parents immediately turned their attention to her. My mother fussed over her, asking about the wedding details, and my father praised her decision to marry someone so well-connected. I sat there, trying not to let the bitter taste of jealousy overwhelm me. My presence seemed to fade into the background, as if I didn't matter. I wasn't the one with a wedding to plan, the one getting attention for doing things that were right. I was the one still struggling to figure out what my life was supposed to look like. I had already accepted the fact that I would never be the one to receive that kind of praise, that kind of attention. I wasn't built for it. But it didn't stop the sting. My career choices were always met with reluctance. I didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps, taking over the family business or working a corporate job. I had dreamed of writing, of creating something that could last, something that spoke to the soul. But to my parents, this was a childish fantasy. "You'll never make money off of books, Madison," my father had once said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You need a stable career, something that will support you in the long run. You're just not being practical." Every choice I made was seen as an act of rebellion. Every dream I pursued was treated as something that would lead me nowhere. It wasn't that they didn't love me. They did, in their way. but they loved Sophie more. And they loved the idea of me more. The daughter they hoped I'd become, the one who lived up to their expectations, who followed the straight line. I wasn't that person, and as time went on, I realized they weren't really seeing me for who I was. I wasn't Sophie. I couldn't be. I wasn't the kind of person who thrived in corporate settings, who wore pearls and designer shoes to every event. I was the one who found joy in the quiet moments, in the simple act of getting lost in a book or finding inspiration from the people around me. I wanted to tell stories, to create art that mattered, not just for the sake of profit, but because it had meaning. But how could I explain that to them? How could I make them understand that my worth wasn't defined by the things they valued most? My dreams were mine, not theirs. And yet, for years, I tried to fit into their mold, thinking that if I could just make them proud, I would finally feel like I belonged. But I never did. And as time passed, I learned to accept that. I learned to live with the fact that I would never be the daughter they had imagined. I wasn't their version of success, and I would never be. But that didn't make me a failure. It made me something else. Something they didn't know how to see. I was a dreamer, a writer, a creator. And that was enough. The bookstore became my safe space, a place where I wasn't judged, a place where I could finally breathe. It was there, surrounded by stories, that I started to realize who I was. I wasn't the daughter they wanted me to be, but I was the person I was meant to be. And maybe that was enough after all. But despite everything, I couldn't help but wonder, was it possible for my family to ever see me for who I really was? Would they ever stop trying to change me? Stop pushing me to become someone I wasn't? I didn't know. But what I did know was that I was finally starting to see myself. And that was a start. It was an ordinary morning, or at least it should have been. I walked into Pete's corner store like I did every other day, with a tired sigh and a quiet wave to Pete, the old man behind the counter. The faint smell of fresh coffee beans and old wood filled the air, and the low hum of the ceiling fan above me seemed to echo my own low mood. Life was just going on, the same way it always had. I had my usual black coffee, nothing fancy, and turned to pay when Pete stopped me. "Madison, did you check your ticket?" His voice was unusually full of excitement, his eyes sparkling behind his glasses. I blinked, confused. "What ticket?" "The lottery ticket you bought 2 days ago," he said, grinning, and I remembered. The last $5 I had, spent on a whim because, honestly, what was the harm? It wasn't like I had any real plans for the money anyway. A cheap indulgence, something to take my mind off of things for just a second. I dug into my pocket, pulling out the crumpled ticket and unfolding it. I checked the numbers, absent-mindedly at first. 7, 13, 24, 31, 42, 53. I froze. Pete watched me carefully as I pulled out my phone, navigating to the lottery website, my hands trembling slightly as the screen lit up. There, on my phone, the same numbers blinked back at me. I had won. I had won $97 million. My head spun. The world felt like it tilted slightly to the side. I couldn't breathe. I blinked several times, half thinking it was a joke, half convinced that I would wake up any moment and find myself still in the cramped apartment above the bookstore. But no, the ticket was real. I was real. And so was the money. I stood there, staring at the numbers, unable to process what they meant. Pete's voice cut through my fog. "Sit down, Madison. You're about to pass out." I felt my knees weaken, and he gently guided me to the chair behind the counter. The worn wood creaked under my weight. Everything felt too heavy, too surreal. I had just stepped into Pete's store a few minutes ago, as I always did, and now I was holding a lottery ticket worth more than I could ever dream of. My mind raced. Pete leaned over and whispered, "Take deep breaths, kiddo. This is huge, but you need to keep your head on straight. Don't tell anyone just yet. First thing you need to do is get a lawyer." He was right, of course. I needed to do this right. But the weight of the decision already felt like a ton pressing on my chest. Everything in my life was about to change. I didn't know how to process it. how to tell the world, how to even start making sense of something so big. Pete locked the ticket in his safe and made a phone call. My daughter Caroline will meet you in an hour. She's a financial lawyer and she'll help you make sure everything goes smoothly. I nodded, still in shock. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Pete kept talking, giving me advice I wasn't fully taking in, but his calm presence helped. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't entirely alone. When Caroline arrived, she was calm, professional, and efficient, guiding me through the process of claiming the winnings and keeping my identity protected. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but she made it clear. We'll set up a trust, make sure no one can access your winnings, and keep this under wraps until you're ready. I nodded, doing my best to focus, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I could feel the weight of the ticket in my pocket as though it were burning through the fabric of my jacket. Caroline's calm demeanor reassured me, but I couldn't help but feel like I was in a dream. This wasn't my life, was it? A woman who worked at a bookstore writing her novel in the silence of her tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet. That woman didn't win $97 million, but I had, and I was still me, wasn't I? The next morning, I woke up in a daze, unsure of what to do next. The reality of my new life had barely started to settle in, and yet my phone was already buzzing with messages. Old friends, acquaintances, family. I had expected the flood of calls and texts, but it still felt overwhelming. Among the messages, one stood out. Sophie. She had been the first to reach out. "Oh my God, Maddie, why didn't you tell us? Call me immediately." It was like a slap in the face, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. My parents followed soon after. "Madison, where are you living? What's going on? Call us immediately." The floodgates had opened, and with them came a rush of emotions I wasn't prepared for. I stared at the messages, feeling my throat tighten. They didn't care about me. Not really. They cared about what they could get from me. Their lives were falling apart. And here I was, holding the key to everything they had ever wanted. I knew it wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper. Something I had never been able to define, but had always felt. Their relationship with me had never been about love or support. It had always been about what I could do for them, what they could mold me into. Sophie was their perfect daughter, the one they could boast about, the one they could live through. I had always been the other one, the one they didn't quite know how to deal with. But now, I had $97 million, and for the first time in my life, I had the power to decide what happened next. I spent the day processing everything, trying to wrap my mind around what this win meant. I wasn't thinking about fancy cars or luxury vacations. I was thinking about freedom. The kind of freedom I had never felt before. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that my life had just changed. But how? Would it change for the better? Or would it all fall apart? Over the next few weeks, the whirlwind of media attention was overwhelming. My name was everywhere. Every local news station, every online article, every social media post. The world knew my name, and suddenly, the people who had once overlooked me, dismissed me, were calling me, texting me, begging me for a piece of it. But I didn't want any of it. I didn't want to be their savior. I didn't want to fix their problems. I had worked my entire life to build something real, something that was mine. And I wasn't going to let that be overshadowed by their greed. And then the phone calls came from my parents. Sophie, too. They were frantic, desperate. They didn't care about me, they didn't care about how I was doing. They cared about the money. My mother's voice was thick with emotion, but not the kind of emotion I had hoped for. It wasn't concern for my well-being. It was desperation. "Madison, we've been so worried. Where are you living? How did you afford this house? The lottery money hasn't even been released yet." I had heard this before. The same kind of talk. When I was growing up, it wasn't about me. It was always about what I could do to make them proud, to fit into the mold they had created for me. I felt a wave of anger rise within me. I had worked so hard to break free from their expectations, to carve out my own path, and now they were trying to use my success as another way to control me. The message was clear. They didn't see me as an independent person. They saw me as a tool, something they could use to maintain the lifestyle they had built. But not anymore. I had built something on my own, something real, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. It had been weeks since the world discovered I had won the lottery. My phone buzzed constantly, a never-ending stream of messages and calls from friends, distant relatives, and even acquaintances I had never really known. Most of them were strangers to me, people who suddenly seemed to remember I existed. It felt suffocating. My life had always been quiet, understated, filled with small joys that didn't rely on approval from others. And now, it felt like I was drowning in the expectations of people who had never truly seen me. But it was my family's reaction that hit hardest. Sophie, of course, was the first to reach out. Her message was a mixture of surprise, excitement, and a touch of guilt. "Oh my God, Maddie, I can't believe it. Why didn't you tell us? Call me right now." The exclamation points were so many I could practically hear her voice echoing through the text. Her message felt empty, like it was just another way to drag me back into the fold of their expectations, to use me for whatever I could offer them. I had known Sophie my whole life, but now the dynamic had changed. It wasn't about sibling bonding or concern for me. It was about the prize I'd won. When my parents called, the tone was different. They were frantic, almost angry. "Madison, where are you living? How did you afford all of this? What's going on?" My father's voice was strained, the kind of tone you take when you don't understand something and need to control it. It wasn't genuine concern. It was fear. Fear of what I had become, of what I might do with the money. They were no longer interested in me as their daughter. I was a means to an end. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my new home, surrounded by the life I had carefully built with my own hands. It was a modest house, far from the luxury homes my parents favored, but it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe, where I could feel truly free for the first time. I hadn't bought a mansion or flashy cars. I had bought peace. I had invested in a future that didn't depend on their approval, and now they were knocking at my door, desperate for a piece of it. The doorbell rang one afternoon as I was reading a book in my small but cozy living room. I looked up and saw the familiar faces of my parents, standing there on the other side of the glass. Sophie was with them, of course. Her designer dress was perfectly pressed, her hair immaculately styled. My parents, too, looked out of place, their clothes too perfect for the life I had chosen to build. They weren't here for a visit. They weren't here to see how I was doing, how I was settling into my new life. They were here because they needed something from me. When I opened the door, my mother wasted no time. "Madison, we've been so worried. You haven't answered any of our calls. Where are you living? How did you afford this house? The lottery money hasn't even been released yet." Her words came out in a rush, filled with panic, as though she had been rehearsing them for days. There was no warmth in her voice, no genuine curiosity about how I was managing this sudden windfall. Just worry about the money, about how my life would affect theirs. Sophie, standing beside my mother, smiled with forced cheerfulness. "Well, now that you have all this money, maybe you'll finally buy a house in a nice neighborhood, something close to mine. There's a beautiful colonial just down the street for only $4 million. You could even use some of that money to help us out." I held my breath, feeling the rage bubble up from somewhere deep inside. The audacity, the entitlement. She wasn't even pretending to be concerned about my happiness. She wasn't even pretending to care about what I had built. She was only thinking about how this could help her. "Thank you for the suggestion," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm happy here." My mother, hearing the firmness in my voice, stepped in again. "Maddie, darling, you have to understand. This is life-changing money. You'll need guidance, proper financial advice. Your father knows several wealth managers. We could help you, you know. Your father and I could advise you on how to make the most of it." Her words were coated in sugar, but the underlying message was clear. I was still the daughter they could mold, the one they could shape into the version of success they wanted. I felt the anger surge through me, but I held it in check. "I've already taken care of everything. I've got a financial team, and I've made plans for my future. Sophie, seemingly undeterred by my refusal, tried again. Well, maybe now you'll finally see that we were only trying to help you. We were just worried about you, Maddie. You could have had a business, a career just like me. We could have helped you get there. The words felt like a slap. I could feel the years of their judgment weighing down on me. The years of being told I wasn't practical, that my dreams weren't good enough. Sophie and my parents never once tried to understand why I made the choices I did. They didn't see the value in what I was doing. They didn't see the hours I spent working on my novel, the moments I spent pouring my heart into something that had nothing to do with the money they cared so much about. Actually, I said, my voice calm but firm, you never once asked about my goals, my dreams. You never once cared about what I wanted. You wanted me to be someone else, someone who fit into your idea of success. But that's not me. I reached for the envelopes I had prepared earlier and handed them to my parents and Sophie. The first one contained a cashier's check for $110,000, repaying the loan Sophie had given me when I started my first small business, a business I had never fully pursued. The second envelope held $15,000, money that represented every gift, every payment they had ever made on my behalf. I had kept careful records. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing them that I no longer needed their approval or their money to live my life. The third envelope was the hardest to hand over. It contained the documents that proved I had already established my own publishing company, started a foundation for literacy programs, and set up an investment portfolio. It was my life, my future, built on my own terms. This, I said quietly, is what I've built. This is what I've done. I don't need your advice. I don't need your help. My mother stared at the envelope, speechless. My father, too, was silent. Sophie's face flushed with anger, but there was something else behind her eyes. Something that looked like fear, or maybe jealousy. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to react to someone who had stopped playing by their rules. Finally, my father spoke, his voice tight. We've always supported you. Both of you. I laughed, a short, bitter laugh that escaped before I could stop it. Equal support? I asked. You bought Sophie a mansion for her wedding. You paid for her business school. You paid for her first car, her perfect wedding. And what did you give me? A lecture about practical career choices because you were worried about me. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I had been crying for years, every time they dismissed me, every time they tried to force me into their mold. Now, I wasn't crying anymore. We just wanted to help you, my mother said through the tears. We wanted to make sure you'd be safe, that you'd have everything you needed. No, I said, cutting her off. What you wanted was for me to be just like Sophie, the perfect daughter, the sensible one. But that's not who I am, and I don't need your approval anymore. I walked to the door and opened it, feeling the weight of everything lift just a little bit more. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with my foundation board about funding new libraries in underserved communities. As they stood there, frozen in disbelief, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was free. Free from their expectations. Free from the pressure they had put on me for years. I had the power to choose my life now, and it was nothing like the one they had planned for me. As they left, Sophie turned to me, her voice tight with resentment. You think you're better than us now, don't you? No, Sophie, I said, my voice calm. I always was. You just never saw it. And with that, I closed the door. Olivia's journey is one of transformation, courage, and self-discovery. Born into a family that had a clear vision of success, Olivia was always the underdog, overshadowed by her sister, Sophie, who seemed to embody the kind of success their parents revered. From a young age, Olivia felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. Sophie, the high achiever, the one who always played by the rules, received constant validation and support. Olivia, on the other hand, was misunderstood. Her love for literature, her desire to become a writer, and her choice to work in a bookstore instead of pursuing a traditional career path were viewed as impractical by her parents. The contrast between the two sisters was stark. Sophie was the golden child, the one who did everything right, while Olivia was the dreamer, the one who chose a different path. For years, Olivia tried to meet her family's expectations, but her efforts were never enough. She constantly felt overlooked, judged, and dismissed. Despite all the love she had for her work and her dreams, the approval of her parents remained elusive. However, she never gave up. Olivia's resilience was quietly building inside her. She continued to write, to work at the bookstore, and to hold on to the belief that there was more to life than following the predictable, conventional path. Then came the moment that would change everything. Olivia won the lottery. A seemingly random impulse purchase of a lottery ticket transformed her life in an instant. With the $97 million prize, she was finally free from the financial constraints that had held her back. But more importantly, she was free from the emotional shackles her family had placed on her. She no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their judgment. For the first time in her life, she had the power to define her own success. As Olivia navigated her newfound wealth, she chose not to succumb to the temptations of excess or flaunt her newfound status. Instead, she made calculated, thoughtful decisions, buying a modest home, investing in her future, and starting her own publishing company to help other underrepresented voices find their place in the literary world. Olivia knew that true wealth was not just about money, but about having the freedom to live authentically and pursue her passions without fear of judgment. But with great wealth came great pressure. Her family, who had always seen her as the underachiever, suddenly began to see her as a means to solve their own financial problems. They called, texted, and showed up at her door, desperate for a piece of her success. Sophie, who had once been the center of attention, now looked at Olivia with a mix of envy and entitlement. Her parents, too, were quick to offer unsolicited advice, thinking that they could still shape her life and decisions. Olivia's response was firm and decisive. She refused to let them back into her life under the guise of helping her. She no longer needed them to define her worth, nor did she want to perpetuate the cycle of favoritism and control they had subjected her to for years. In an act of self-empowerment, Olivia repaid the loan Sophie had given her when she started her first business, returned every penny her parents had ever invested in her, and showed them that she was not just the daughter they had written off as a disappointment. She had created her own path, one that was far more meaningful than any material wealth could ever provide. Olivia had built a life based on her values, not theirs, and she was determined to continue that journey, regardless of how her family reacted. The culmination of Olivia's story was not just about the wealth she had gained, but about the realization that her true success lay in her ability to live authentically. She no longer sought her family's approval or validation. She had broken free from the constraints of their expectations, and in doing so, had found peace within herself. Her journey was one of self-acceptance, and the power to choose her own path, free from judgment, was the greatest gift of all. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that success is not one size fits all. In a world that often glorifies certain paths, corporate success, financial wealth, social status, it can be easy to forget that true fulfillment comes from living in alignment with your own values and passions. The journey to success is not always linear, and it's important to remember that the definition of success is personal. It's not about meeting other people's expectations or following a prescribed set of rules. It's about finding your own voice, embracing your uniqueness, and forging your own path, even when it feels difficult or uncertain. One of the most important lessons from Olivia's journey is the importance of self-validation. We all have the power to choose how we define our worth. Olivia was constantly judged and overlooked by her family, but she didn't let their opinions define who she was. She realized that external validation, no matter how much we crave it, cannot be the measure of our self-worth. True success comes from within, from knowing that we are enough just as we are. It's about taking ownership of our choices and standing firm in our beliefs, even when the world doesn't understand or approve. Another key lesson is the importance of boundaries. Olivia set firm boundaries with her family, refusing to let their toxic behavior continue to affect her life. She no longer allowed them to use her for their own gain, and she made it clear that her success was not something they could manipulate. Setting boundaries is an essential part of self-care and self-respect. It allows us to protect our peace and focus on what truly matters. So, how can we apply these lessons to our own lives? First, we need to reflect on our own definition of success. Are we living according to our own values, or are we following someone else's path because we think it's what we're supposed to do? Second, we need to embrace self validation. We must stop seeking approval from others and start recognizing our own worth. Finally, we need to set clear boundaries. Whether it's with family, friends, or colleagues, we have the right to protect our time, our energy, and our emotional well being. We all have the power to live authentically and create a life that is meaningful to us. Olivia's journey shows us that, regardless of the obstacles we face or the opinions of others, we can achieve true success by staying true to ourselves. If you found inspiration in Olivia's story and the lessons it brings, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to continue creating more meaningful content that resonates with you. Let's keep this journey going together.